Hey everyone, Dire Regulus here. Welcome to the Dire Pirates. Today I will be the captain navigating you through this theory on the Will of D. The Will of D remains one of the biggest mysteries in the One Piece story, even if we are now 10,053 chapters deep in it. There's been a ton of great theories on the Will of D over the years, but I've never heard something that came close to what I came up with. First things first, I'm pretty sure the Will of D is linked to JoyBoy and the Void Century, as the story has implied a few times. And while many think Nika and JoyBoy are the same person, I personally do not think they are one and the same. Early on in the story of One Piece, there are some moon folk who leave the planet to go live on the moon, but eventually they come back. I think a few members of that race, and maybe others, were powerful beyond norms and were eventually recognized as gods. Nika was most likely one of those gods, and he comes from a group of warriors that are known as a pantheon that comes from a time before the Void Century. More on that bunch in my next video. And from what I came up with, the Will of D also ties into the very first Davey back fight. So if JoyBoy and Nika are not the same, JoyBoy is simply the first person that inherited Nika's will through his devil fruit. So what do we know about the Will of D? Not much, to be fair. They're known as devils, dreamers, demons, the dawn, the natural enemies or arch enemies of God. And all those answers are pretty much correct. In the One Piece world, D is a symbol, not an actual written character. When you look at Japanese names, it's the only thing that never gets translated. The D remains a D. So it's not really about the letter, but more about the symbol that it looks like. It looks a lot like a half moon, and this is not just a stretch when you look at another set of ancient families, the clans of Wano. The names associated with each Wano clan all refer to the moon in their naming convention, all using the same specific kanji character in doing so, even if there's two sounds that come out from this naming convention, Tsuki and Getsu. So again, the symbolism of the character used over the actual meaning. That kanji is called Radical 74, and if you go back thousands of years through its history, it really looks like the letter D. And on top of that, the first time we hear about the Will of D canonically from Dr. Kuroha, the next panel shows a full moon. So yeah, Wano clans would also be D members. I'll probably look in the future into other possible members of the D clan that have it hidden in their name rather than have a straight up D in their name. So that would mean that the Will of D is not necessarily directly related to JoyBoy, but to anyone who actually followed his ambitions. And there is probably way more D's than we thought. So having that said as the meaning for the Will of D, I have to figure out who JoyBoy was, what his identity was. And before we keep going into that, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on top of it if you want. I will be releasing more content regularly. I'm trying to get on a better pace. The channel's still new, and any encouragement will really be appreciated. So we know that Oda loves real-world inspiration, and I looked into real-world pirate folklore to maybe find what JoyBoy's identity might be. And there's one particular devil of the sea that's really famous in pirate folklore that Oda has only scratched the surface with, and honestly, I think he could be the first half of JoyBoy's name. Davey Jones. Now we'll go through what Davey Jones means in terms of JoyBoy, but this is only the first half of JoyBoy's name. The other half of the name comes from one of the inspirations for the folk of Davey Jones, the Book of Jonah and its hero, Jonah. So JoyBoy's full name was Davey Jonah. I'll explain why. Why do I think it's a mix of two names of two famous figures? As much as Oda likes inspiring himself from real-life folklore and real-life pirates, when he's using a reference to a real name, he likes using just one of the names or maybe modifying the second name just to give it more flavor, more uniqueness, and make it fit the character. Jewelry Bonnie is only partly named after Anne Bonny. Eustace Kidd shares half the name of his real-life counterpart, William Captain Kidd. Basil Hawkins' real name is actually the fusion of two real-life pirates, Basil Ringrose and John Hawkins. And then we have Blackbeard, who's called Marshall Teach, which is based on real-life Blackbeard, who was called Edward Teach. Which brings us into Whitebeard. He's also a part of two pieces of pirate folk, Blackbeard himself, Edward Teach, as we just said, he has the Edward part, and the famous Newgate prison, a prison establishment where pirates were hung. Funny enough, Captain Kidd, William Kidd from real life, was hung in that same prison. And that's why I think JoyBoy has a mix, and that he's called Davey Jonah. Oda also said in an SBS that Davey Back was a different legend than the real life Davey Jones legend. So we can play with this distinction. So let's analyze the Davey part of Davey Jonah. In pirate folklore or navigators' tales, Davey Jones is literally considered the devil of the sailor, and he is the ghost of Jonah. One of the earliest references to Davey Jones is in the story written by Tobias Smollett, The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, published in 1751. This same Davey Jones, according to sailors, is the fiend that presides over all the evil spirits of the deep, and is often seen in various shapes perching among the rigging on the eve of hurricanes. Often seen in various shapes? If JoyBoy has the Nika fruit, he's going to be seen in various shapes. The book also describes Davey's appearance as following. Jones is described as having saucer eyes, 3 rows of teeth, horns, a tail, and blue smoke coming from his nostrils. To me, thinking with the One Piece story in mind, 2 elements pop out in that. Number 1, if we think about the horns, this could probably make Davey an Oni. Or wait, if we look at the timeline, Void Century, Horus is not even born. And the hat in Marijois is really big. So was JoyBoy an ancient giant? I'm gonna go with that. Number 2, the mention of smoke. It just reminds me of Luffy's Gear's second smoke. Something that would appear when Davey uses Nika's devil fruit. And yeah, you will get Davey Jonah's tale at the end of this video. And you might be thinking, hey, there's already a Jones lineage in the story. Yeah, there is. Hody Jonah's lineage seems like the perfect cop-out for the Gorosei to like match Davey Jonah's lineage to him and have it fit with that of what they perceive as a lowlife. But in reality, the only reason Oda used the name Jones for Hody Jones is for the wordplay with the name Jaws. On top of that, the only details we ever get about Davey Jones is on Long Ring Long Island against Foxy. Isn't it odd that it's on like the only island that looks like it could have been stretched by the powers of Sun God Nika? Just saying. After all, the island's different habitable points are all separated by a high tide that can't easily be navigated. This may be a hint to the people of Tanjit's tribe, you know, the guy on stilts, being liberated by JoyBoy at some point. Like he stretched out the island like that so they could run away and not get reached out by their oppressors. And not all traditions relating to Davey Jones are negative. In real-world tradition among sailors, when you pass through the equatorial line, there's a tradition that is done where you throw a big feast, a big party, for all those that are doing this for the first time. Those who have done it before, that have passed before, are known as shellbacks or sons of Neptune. The eldest one amongst them is known as King Neptune for the ceremony. And for the duration of the ceremony, the person he chooses as his assistant is known as Davey Jones. Now, this is pretty similar to the feasts that JoyBoy likes to throw. Could also very well be a wink to JoyBoy's relation with fishmen and their kingdom. Now let's move on to the Jonah bit of the story, and this is where the meat of Davey Jonah's story would come from. Jonah is the hero of the aforementioned Book of Jonah. He appears in Christian, Islamic, and Judaic religion stories. And just if we go with the biblical level, well, it kind of fits with stuff like the Adam tree and the Eve tree. And Jonah is also known like the proto-Jesus, a precursor to Jesus, so JoyBoy would kind of be here a precursor to the better-known figure that Luffy will end up being. Jonah in Hebrew means dove, which in their culture is also a symbol of peace. And at some points in history, like in 18th century Germany, the Book of Jonah was actually banned from here for when it could teach people. Kind of like the Gorosei like to hide and bury some stuff in history to their own advantage. So let's do a quick point-by-point of the Book of Jonah. It's like a 5-page read, but no worries, my lazy friend, I got you. So Noah's this fella, a leader, commander of an army directed by God, who's told to go to the city of Nineveh and tell them that in 40 days, God is going to wreck their shit. All this for their sinful ways. Jonah, not being so cool with all of this, runs away to the city of Jaffa, a portuary city, which he knows will be able to get him to the city of Tarnish after that. He makes it to Jaffa, gets a crew, and sets sail to the hidden city of Tarnish. However, on his way to Tarnish, God starts a storm, symbolizing his wrath. In some versions of the story, Jonah decides to jump overboard to save his crew, to run away from God's wrath, so the crew can get away. In others, the crew are the ones who throw him overboard. In any case, once in the water, Jonah gets swallowed by a whale. He spends 3 days and 3 nights in the whale, after which he realizes the error of his ways, and he decides to abide by God's request. God then has the whale vomit Jonah out. He goes to the city of Nineveh, tells them they'll be hit by God in 40 days. The city of Nineveh decides to fast in order to repent, forces everyone, even the animals. After 40 days, God changes his plan, decides he forgives them. This angers Jonah. He asks God, if in the first place you were going to forgive them, like the loving God you are, why even make them suffer? And God kind of responds that Jonah isn't even allowed to be mad about this stuff. Things go on a bit, and the story kind of ends with Jonah being angry with God with this situation and just wishing he was dead. Now, I think mainly it's the first part of the story up to where Jonah gets swallowed by the whale that Oda borrowed from for Davey Jonah. And from there, in true Oda fashion, he turned it on its head. So let's have a look at the similarities between JoyBoy and Jonah. In the Judaic version of the story, once Jonah is in the whale tells it that they're both still gonna die because the Leviathan is after them. Jonah tells the whale not to worry and asks it to swim up to the Leviathan. He then tells the Leviathan to leave them alone, otherwise it'll leash it by its own tongue and let the other fish eat it up. The Leviathan recognizes this threat and flees in terror. So the Leviathan could easily mirror Sea Kings. The threat to leash a whale by its own tongue sounds like something that an awakened Niga would do. And the fact that the Leviathan recognized that threat, listened to it, and ran away is probably some little bit of Conqueror's Haki right there. Other interesting thing about the Book of Jonah is how many scholars throughout the years have considered it a work of parody. It points a finger at those who thought that if they didn't obey God, they would be punished and feared that punishment more than anything else. And it also laughs at those that think that God's love doesn't propagate to those who do not share their beliefs. There's also the irony that the person that God selects as his commander for his big mission is actually named Peace. Jonah's own rebellion is also a critique of the prophets and all the other stories that just follow God blindly. The story also falls into other exaggerations that are kind of on the absurd. The size of the city of Nineveh is absolutely ridiculous. And also the simple fact that the animals fast along with humans, that's kind of within the realm of the absurd. And the goal of absurdity and parody is to make you question things through comedy. Kind of a laugh tale with a message. Then there's the cities in the story of Jonah. This is where I think we can start doing some really good parallels with the story of JoyBoy. Nineveh itself, when you break down the name, is called Place of Fish. Right off the bat, we got our Fishman Island. And if Jonah is JoyBoy and God is the nobles, well, this means that JoyBoy refused the mission on Fishman Island and tried to run away to Jaffa. Now, the city of Jaffa's main descriptor in religious stories is that it is a port city, and pretty much all the islands and cities in One Piece are port cities by default, which doesn't help too much with the sense of association. But there's one thing about Jaffa. It's always on the path of famous heroes. In the case of religious texts, we have Jonah, Solomon, Saint David, and even Perseus. They all went through there. So knowing that, looking at the city's name, I think we can associate Jaffa to Jaya. Nolan, Roger, Luffy, they all went there, and it would make a lot of sense for Jaya to have also been a part of JoyBoy's adventure. And then there's the last city mentioned, Tarnish. Tarnish has a very interesting description. It is said to be a vast city or region that was known for its wealth and the important metals it imported: silver, gold, iron, and tin. Its location was never really known to the common person and was eventually lost to antiquity. So many legends exist about it that it's made it the subject of scholarly research and commentary for more than the last 2,000 years. Yeah, that's right, people. Tarnish is the ancient kingdom, or the great kingdom. Now that we have our locations in place, our parallels with Davey Jonah set, I'm glad to present to you the tale of Davey Jonah. Davey Jonah's origin is unclear. All we know about the man is that he was a young, ancient giant, born either in slavery or as a commoner. Early on in life, Davey has shown himself to be a powerful beast, enough to be noticed and recruited by one of the noble kingdoms of the time. That noble kingdom was one of the 20 that would eventually join an alliance against the great kingdom that was starting to dominate the globe. Once the alliance made, Davey was considered an asset. The 20 Kingdom Alliance then decided to provide him with a power-up, a devil fruit, known as the Hito Hito no Mi, model sun god Nika. After providing him with this increase in power, they gave him a mission. Davey is to travel to Fishman Island, that's been recently caught colluding with the Great Kingdom. He is to find the culprits, bring them back, or punish the whole city if they refuse to cooperate. He hates the way the fishmen are oppressed by their rulers. So Davey has a plan. He asked the inhabitants of Fishman Island to build a great ark, something big enough to transport them all, something that could be pulled by the Sea Kings. He then promises to the people of Fishman Island and the then Princess Poseidon that he would come back one day, after having convinced the Great Kingdom to take them under their banner, to bring them all with the ark to the surface. They would then, all together, enjoy a great feast in honor of their freedom. In order to accomplish this, the fishermen start building the ship that would eventually be known as the Noah. Abandoning his mission given by the 20 kingdoms, Davey makes it to Jaya, where he knows he'll be able to get a crew that will make it to the Great Kingdom, whom he now wishes to side with. Gets his crew, starts his journey to the Great Kingdom, but soon, the 20 Kingdom Alliance gets on his coattails. They start attacking Davey's ship, putting the whole crew in danger. In order to save the crew, Davey decides to jump overboard. Being a devil fruit user, he starts to sink. As he sinks deeper and deeper, he hears voices. Using this voice of all things, he starts calling to them. But it's too late. Everything starts fading away. Davey's gonna die drowning. A time later, Davey awakens, realizes he's inside a whale. His body has turned to white. He starts laughing. Hearing his laugh, the whale warns him he should stop, because they're being followed by a Sea King. Davey tells the whale not to worry and to swim up to the Sea King. Once by the Sea King, Davey uses the voice of all things to tell the creature to go away, otherwise he'll leash it by its tongue and let all the other fish eat him. Unleashes a bit of conquer hacky, delivering the message just to drive it through. The Sea King, hearing this, flees away in terror. Now safe, the whale and Davey Jonah make it to the Great Kingdom. Once there, they learn that Davey has been declared dead, even though his body was never found. And this, people, is the first cover-up ever by the 20 Kingdom Alliance. Impressed by the fact that Davey is feared by the 20 Kingdoms, the Great Kingdom accepts to liberate Fishman Island, but they tell Davey that they will need more support. The 20 Kingdom Alliance is growing very powerful day by day. And Fishman Island is a strategic point for them. It's a backdoor to the New World. They will do everything to defend it. Davey Jonah assures them he will build them a force capable of increasing their army's might. He then assembles a crew of outstanding sailors from within the Great Kingdom. They then leave on a great ship, a trireme that allows them to row when the winds are not kind. When rowing to travel, they would ask crew members to drum a rhythm to keep the pace going. With their loyal whale companion by their side, they would go from one slave-owning island to another, liberating people as they came, rallying them to the cause so that one day Fishman Island could enjoy the same fate. Over time, people would come to know the drumming sound of their incoming ships as the drums of liberation. Davey would start introducing himself to people as JoyBoy simply, preferring to increase the importance of his message of liberation over the value of his own name. Over the course of his adventure, he would recruit many tribes and different races under his banner, mostly because non-humans tend to be the most common slaves. He befriended Zunisha by liberating some minks. He brought an end to the war between the Long-Arm tribe and the Long-Leg tribe, rallying them to the cause. He freed the Tanjit tribe on the Long Ring Longland Island. Members of many other races joined as well, such as the Snake Neck tribe, the Three-Eye tribe, giants, Hinokobitos, Onis, and people of the sky races. Those who believed in Davey the most even changed their names to have it include the D symbol, to show that they were bearing Davey's will. Davey Jones also managed to secure support of the powerful kingdom of Wano, and this all culminates to Davey's attempt to liberate Fishman Island. Unfortunately, the time he's gonna have to break his promise. But on the way to Fishman Island, they are ambushed by the 20 Kingdom Alliance, assembling the biggest fleet anyone has ever seen, full of devil fruit users, some as powerful as Davey it seems. They are quickly outmatched. Trying to spare the lives of those who follow him, Davey tries to flee, but very quickly everyone is forced to run aground on the closest island, Hachinosu, the pirate island. Rapidly surrounded by the 20 Kingdom Alliance, Davey and his people come up with an idea. Davey approaches with a gamble, a game he proposes to them. Rather than losing more lives in the battle, they could hold a backfight. An event where the 20 Kingdom Alliance would get their chance to get their hands on Davey JoyBoy without losing more soldiers, and they could maybe even get some of the liberated slaves back at the same time. Overconfident in themselves, the 20 Kingdom Alliance accepts the bargain. But to their demise, after 3 days and 3 nights of backfights, they still haven't got their paws on Davey or won a single event. They start growing irritated and give a signal to their men. They start attacking Davey and his people. Even the crew members that were won in a backfight do so, ignoring the sacred rule of the Davey backfight. They get decimated. Davey and the few left have one last attempt to run away. Blaming himself for the defeat, Davey decides to stay behind, try to hold back the opposing army, just enough to give a window for the remaining ones to flee. Once he realizes his remaining allies are out of sight, Davey turns around to the sea and uses his voice of all things to call upon his whale companion. Davey Jonah, JoyBoy, turns around to the enemy forces one last time and says, "Don't worry, this doesn't end with me." He then dives in the ocean, where his whale friend swallows him one last time. A few days later, the remainder of the crew arrives to the Great Kingdom. They share the tale of Davey's legendary backfight, the tragedy of his end, and the apology they had to communicate to the residents of Fishman Island that he left with them. His legend survived him, and was even transcribed on the poneglyphs years later to conserve it. Sadly, these events were all what the 20 Kingdom Alliance needed to justify a full-on war onto the Great Kingdom. JoyBoy's failure ended up being the root of the road that would bring us to the Void Century. He was the catalyst that unleashed this war, and that's when the 20 Kingdom Alliance undertook their very first great cleansing. For the years that followed, JoyBoy was actually still alive, living inside his whale companion, tending to a modest garden. They both traveled the sea, gathering what would be the ultimate treasure. The treasure that would one day help the successor of his whale succeed where he failed. And as he got older and weaker, he one day went against the trunk of the only tree in his garden. He sat down against its trunk, leaned over, and said out to his whale companion, "Well, old friend, I think it might be the end of my journey, but do not worry. I left that vile kingdom one last surprise that'll make you smile. If they want their devil fruit back, they'll have to come down here to get it." With a wide smile, he kept on laughing as his whale friend joined in. JoyBoy's spirit slowly faded away from his body as the laugh ended, but the smile never left his face. 3 days and 3 nights later, JoyBoy's body was nowhere to be found inside of the whale, but on the one tree he leaned against had grown one single fruit, the only fruit that tree would ever grow. And so goes the tale of Davey Jonah, JoyBoy. Over time, the meaning of the Davey backfight was sullied. Davey's name associated with an infamous line of fishermen rather than the legend of JoyBoy. All that to hide the truth behind what launched the Void Century and the first Great Cleansing. And this concludes this theory on the will of D and the identity of JoyBoy. If you're still here, thank you for sticking through this wild ride. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like content like this, I have a great theory on ex-Fleet Admiral Son Goku. I'm sure you'll enjoy that too. And as always, thanks for coming. Thanks for watching.